Hi, everyone. Get ready for the How I Raised It podcast, the show where you get an inside, unfiltered look at how real entrepreneurs raise capital for their businesses. I'm your host, Nathan Beckert, and thank you for joining today's episode with Naomi Shah of Meet Cute, an online platform that produces short rom-com podcasts, a new entertainment channel. If you're tuning into this podcast to learn how to raise capital for your business, I've created a super valuable free welcome package for you. It includes a list of 2,500 investors who don't require a warm intro, plus 200 of the most important questions that serious investors are going to ask you. This is really going to help you take your fundraising to the next level. To get instant access to this, click the link in the first comment. And while you're there, please leave us a nice comment. And last but not least, if you enjoy this conversation and think someone else would too, please share it with them and hit that subscribe button to get all our latest episodes. Until then, enjoy the chat with Naomi.
Welcome to How I Raised It, the podcast that goes behind the scenes with entrepreneurs who've raised capital. We uncover the tips, tricks, and techniques they use to get investors to write a check. Strap in and turn it up.
Hi, welcome to another episode of How I Raised It. Today I have Naomi Shah of Meet Cute coming to us from Seattle. How's your day going?
It's going well over here. Had a good morning. How is yours going?
Also great. Got the kids in camp this summer, so we can kind of get some work done and, beautiful day in Marin County, California. So thumbs up.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. What's the highlight of so you're visiting Seattle, you're normally in San Francisco. What's the highlight of your trip so far? Any really cool thing?
We cooled off from the heat wave by jumping in the lake. And so I spent a lot of time in the water this weekend. My phone was upstairs. And so really kind of got a chance to separate from technology for a couple of days, which was nice.
That's great. It's so important to do. It's hard to do, right?
Exactly.
Love it. Cool. Let's get into it. What is Meet Cute?
Meet Cute is a company I founded in the fall of 2019. It's an entertainment venture trying to create consistent, short form, scripted stories for people to enjoy whenever and wherever they are. So we have a very consistent format. You can listen to Meet Cutes on any podcast app, and they'll take you from the meet cute moment between two characters to the happily ever after in exactly 15 minutes. And part of that model is creating hundreds of these stories. So it's almost like flipping the traditional Hollywood entertainment model on its head and saying, we're not a hit-driven business. Instead, we're a consistency-driven business. And we believe that creates trust with our listeners and our audience.
Interesting. Okay. So each of these is a short form audio only, right? Or yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right now, audio only. We're starting to get interest from video production studios to start adapting these into TV and film and short form digital video. So all of that is coming, and we'll layer that into the Meet Cute brand. But our bread and butter is really audio.
Okay. And I think I saw you have like 300 of these already recorded, probably more.
Yes. In the last year, even in the pandemic and COVID, we continued to create a lot of stories. Part of that is because we have this very consistent format. And another part of it is that we work with a large network of creators. And by that, I mean writers, producers, voice actors, sound engineers. And so we parallel process a lot of these stories at the same time. And we really want our audience to have a new story anytime that they come to the feed. And so they get used to listening to these stories as part of their morning routines while they're getting ready for work, walking to class, whatever it is. We want this to just be part of what they need to feel good every day.
Yeah, fun. And so these are, each one is its own like encapsulated story, or is it sort of a series that are related to each other? Mm-hmm.
We do both. So we do have the 15-minute short form story. That was really our first product, so to speak, that we launched with. And then as we started looking at the data, looking at how people engaged with it, we realized that there was a lot of engagement around our longer series and series where we continued to have characters come back in the same setting. So now every month we actually release a season of content, which is a 90-minute show that, follows the same characters, has a narrative arc that spans 6 stories rather than just one story. And so we're excited about experimenting with new characters and universes through these seasons, and then expanding them into multiple seasons when we see success in one of them.
Interesting. I think I saw it described as rom-com, but it sort of sounds like a audio soap opera, maybe. Is that in the
There
right
are,
sandbox?
yes, it's actually so interesting that you say that. There are so many parallels between, why people sit down and watch soap operas and why people would sit down and watch a rom-com. And part of it is that we don't really realize this, but every rom-com has the exact same narrative elements that make us feel relaxed when we watch them. So you're always going to meet the characters in a really fun, serendipitous way where like two people collide in the grocery store or someone spills coffee on the other person. And then they'll go through some sort of conflict, some journey to work through that. And sometimes the journey could be finding themselves or developing self-confidence or things like that are internal. And then there'll be a resolution and a happily ever after or a happy for now, something emotionally satisfying at the ending. And that consistency, to your point about soap operas, is really what allows us to relax into the storyline. And that's part of the reason we love this genre, because there's so much room to experiment within certain constraints that already exist in this type of story.
So I'm probably not your target demographic. Who knows? I could be wrong. But I flew back from Hawaii on Friday, and on the 5-hour flight, I watched Crazy Stupid Love, which was a rom-com with like Steve Carell and Julianne Moore and a bunch of other people. I loved it. It was great.
It's so good. It's such an accessible genre. It's like perfect for airplanes. I actually read this weird fact because I never cry in movies when I'm watching them on Earth, but when I'm like watching them in planes, I always cry in movies. And I was like, this can't just be me. Like, why does this happen? I'm not a movie crier. So I did some research and I found that people generally just have elevated emotional responses on airplanes.
Oh, interesting.
You feel removed from Earth, like you're just in this metal tube, like going top speed towards whatever your destination is. And I think it's pretty interesting. Like, I think that movies and TV shows just hit differently when you're in planes, but
that's really interesting. It makes sense. Yeah, that's funny. Very cool. What's the backstory on this? How did you come up with this idea? Were you a diehard soap opera fan or rom-com fan, or just, what?
Yeah. So I grew up watching rom-coms, and like, I can like name, the rom-coms that kind of defined a lot of how like the lens in which I viewed the world. Like, I would say Bend It Like Beckham was my first favorite rom-com because I was very much of a tomboy growing up, followed my older brother wherever he went, wore all of his hand-me-downs. And the character in Bend It Like Beckham is also a tomboy, loves soccer, doesn't care about like anything girly. And it was really nice to see like a main character that I related to or that I resonated with in a big movie like Bend It Like Beckham. And then I would say a lot of the like, She's the Man was another one like that. The Proposal is another kind of like badass woman character that, doesn't really see the point in the relationship. And so it was just like fun to watch these movies at sleepovers growing up. But I never imagined that I would start a company around rom-coms. And I'll tell you why. I studied mechanical engineering at school, ended up going into finance. And so I worked on the trading floor at Goldman for a little less than a year, realized that I wanted to do something a little bit more creative. And I started working at Union Square Ventures on their investment team. And it's an early stage venture firm out in New York. They've invested in a lot of companies that I'm sure a lot of listeners have heard of: Twitter, Etsy, SoundCloud. And I was fascinated by working with companies at the earliest stages because so much of it is just problem solving in its rawest form, where, you're like, I'm hiring my first international employee. Like, how do I do that? Or I have no idea how to launch a marketing campaign. And I loved rolling up my sleeves and actually going to the office of whatever portfolio company we were working with and sitting with them for a day or two to like work through these really specific problems. And so I started out as a generalist on the investment team where I was looking at all portfolio companies, really didn't have a sector that I was focused on. But over time, I was really drawn to our portfolio companies that were a little bit more consumer facing, affected people day to day, and were focused on the category of well-being. So mental health companies, healthcare companies. And there was kind of this like voice in the back of my mind, and a lot of partners were, starting to talk about it, where it's like, what are the categories that we haven't invested in yet that fit our thesis? Because USV's thesis was around broadening access to well-being, broadening access to capital, and broadening access to education. And so as I was going through this process of working with our well-being companies, I was like, there is this under-invested in category in venture capital, which is what people do for fun. Like, you start meditating or you go to a mental health app because you feel like something is kind of like, you feel like you might have to, but like you go to a concert or you watch a movie or you read a book, not because you feel like you have to, but because you want to. And so we were looking at media companies and entertainment companies. And that's really where I started building out the business model for what does it look like to be a venture-backed entertainment company that USV could invest in. And so I was starting to look for that company out there. And I knew I wanted it to be like short form content, really scalable and efficient with capital. I really was excited about the audio space. I was working closely with one of the partners at USV named Andy Weissman, and both of us were excited about music and audio. And as I was searching for this company, I couldn't find the right fit. But in doing that, I basically started putting together the business model for what ended up being Meet Cute. And later that summer, a couple of the partners, including Andy, sat me down at USV and were like, have you ever thought about operating a company? And I hadn't really seen that for myself, that path yet, because it just wasn't as clear. I kind of assumed that I would, go to business school. Both my parents had done that. And, as I talked to them and worked at USV, I realized a lot of the founders that we worked with didn't go to business school, but just learned by trial by fire. And so I was kind of excited about that. So I was like, let's just do it. Let's start this company. Let's go hire a team. And so working out of the USV office for the first few weeks, I just started incorporating a company and opened a bank account and learned all these, the checklist of items you have to do to found a company. And by that point, I was really excited about what the vision for now Meet Cute would end up being, where it would flip the model for entertainment on its head and come up with a very unique way to scalably create stories from scratch. And so, that's the Genesis story.
That's the Genesis story. That's good. Was it, because we've seen a couple fairly attractive acquisitions of podcasting companies in the last year or two. I mean, was it tempting, or did you find yourself being pulled, I could create that for this category? And I mean, it almost feels like you built something to flip pretty quickly, or did you just stay true to you know what I'm saying? There's sort of a gravitational pull when you're seeing companies get acquired fairly quickly. Yeah. I don't know. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I think we're excited. And the whole team is very excited about building a long-lasting entertainment brand where when you think of Meet Cute, you think of the official source of romantic comedies. And what's interesting is when you think of a genre like rom-coms, no one owns that vertical. People own platforms like streaming platforms where you can go consume a lot of content and they have a lot of distribution. But what we're excited about is almost owning the emotions and the feelings that come with this genre. So I imagine Meet Cute as not only audio, so I almost don't even describe ourselves as just a podcast, even though we distribute on podcast feeds. Audio is just where we start. And then we build on top with, short form digital video, TV, film, live events, merchandise, amusement parks, and follow the same type of growth that Disney saw. They did it over 70 years, and we want to do it in a much faster timeline because we have so many digital tools and the ability to build a community at our disposal now, and we can get creative with all of those resources.
Wouldn't expect you to say amusement parks, but good to have that in the pitch deck as a future potential avenue.
Yeah, it's almost like who knows what the future holds. Right now, our number one priority is to be the best storytellers. And if we can nail that goal and we can attract an audience that cares about our storytelling, then that just becomes a starting place. And then, people should be wearing Meet Cute sweatshirts, wanting to go see the next Meet Cute movie in theaters. That's the vision.
Cool. So let's get to the fundraising side. I think it would pick up naturally, probably from your Genesis story. You're in Union Square Ventures offices, sort of incubating this. Do they cut you a check, or tell me how you raise money, how much you raised, and sort of the path there, please? Yep.
Yes, definitely. So in the earliest days of Meet Cute, I was working out of the USV office. They knew kind of every facet of the company because I was just around them all the time. And one of the things that I was excited about was actually going through the process of building a team, building a pitch deck, and coming back in and pitching to USV in the same way that every founder has done from the time that I started there.
Yep.
So I was very excited that they wanted to kind of go through that formal process, even though I was their colleague before that. And so I ended up bringing on a few people, spending a couple months actually making our first story, kind of deciding like, what are the time constraints that we want for the story? That's where we picked 15 minutes. We figured out what budgets were like. We figured out how to do this a couple times. And then we went back in, and I remember walking into the USV conference room, which is where I had sat every single Monday before that. And I was like, wow, I really get the feeling that other founders feel when they walk in here, like it's intimidating. You have like 15 people around the table. Everyone's waiting for you to get started. And the best feeling was when you open your deck and you get stopped on the second slide, and it just evolves into this really organic conversation. So I remember just skipping around my deck entirely and not even presenting, because people were genuinely interested in, one, the idea, two, the vision, like what does this look like 5 years from now? And then three, the path that you take from day one to year 5. And it was a really fun conversation. It was very much a two-way conversation where the people around the table, all the partners at USV, my fellow analysts, were giving me ideas, and I was like scribbling notes. So I have like, 2 or 3 pages of notes from that first fundraise. And then USV ended up leading that round. It was a $3 million seed round. We also brought Advanced Capital, which is Sherry Redstone's fund, who also is very involved in media and entertainment, into the round, and a few individual investors. But that ended up being a really great jumping off point, because I had a close relationship with USV, and I knew that they were going to be hands-on investors because I'd seen them do that with every other portfolio company. And being a solo first-time founder, that was super important to me, because I wanted that support, and that, exactly what you said, like at first it was an incubator. So that was kind of like that first day of fundraising. And it was a really fast round compared to, I think, how most founders go about their seed round, where, you have to break into the VC deal flow community, and then you have to like start meeting people. And I think that I skipped a few of those steps, which was pretty unique. But that was just part of the path of going from VC to operating. I wouldn't have taken that path had I not been at USV in the first place, looking at the space, all of that. So they were integral to that first fundraise that we went through.
Did you it wasn't just them, but did you take the deal around? So I find it kind of interesting they made you go through a formal pitch process, but did you also kind of take the deal and
shop it around?
Shop it around a little. Maybe there's a better way to say that, but kind of, yeah.
I didn't. And part of it was just because like the reason that I'd started the company was because I was looking at this space from USC's perspective. So I think that in that way, Meet Cute was not just like a separate company that came to USV as a pitch. It really was like, I remember sitting in in Andy's office and like talking about, here's what I'm thinking in terms of how we go about hiring. Here's what I'm thinking in terms of, what our first few business model ideas could look like. And so they were really part of the process of, bouncing ideas around, which like, if I had a co-founder, I would have had a lot of these conversations with them. Right. So it only felt right that like USV led the deal, because the like entire idea and like why I was the one who was going to be working on it was because I was on the investment team looking at this space for them and with them. So I didn't shop it around. And, at that point, like, I think it was actually a really good decision, because I felt like I almost had the support of the entire USV team. For example, like when I was hiring, it wasn't just one person at USV that was invested. It was everyone at USV being like, oh, here's an idea, here's an introduction, because they didn't just treat me as like one partner's portfolio company. Instead, it was like, you were a former colleague. And so, there was like a different relationship where I went into the USV office many times in that month to sit down with a different partner and ask for advice on marketing, or sit down with a different partner and ask for like, how do I set up my first financial model and budgeting? So really, I think that that was a unique part because as an analyst on the investment team, I had those relationships with everyone at the company, at the firm, from the investment partners to the network team, even to, the people who, did all the finances at USV. So it was, when I was like, what benefits platform do I use? That was me going into the team at USV who ran the benefits for the firm and asking for advice there. So I think it was truly a unique setup where I felt very supported in a way that I don't think, a new founder coming in to a different firm would have had that kind of support.
Interesting. Let's see here. Did you ever once pitch it as Quibi for rom-com before Quibi blew up?
I did not. And I'll tell you why. And I have so much respect for Quibi. I think they tried something really difficult in a really hard time. Very smart founding team, very smart team. So the reason I didn't is because I view Quibi as kind of a top-down model in entertainment where you raise a lot of capital and you deploy a lot of capital behind each title that you put out. So they brought in the biggest celebrities, they brought in writers and directors that people knew about. And that was really how they wanted to scale. Meet Cute is different in that I view us as like a bottoms-up approach to scaling, where we actually started out with writers and voice actors that people wouldn't know, but we wanted them to become stars through writing and voice acting in Meet Cutes. And we started distribution, not because we already owned distribution channels, but because we were like, we just want to grow an audience for something entirely new. So I think the way that we approached creating stories and working with a network was very different. And frankly, like the team was so different. You have like Jeff Katzenberg and Meg Whitman working on Quibi. And for us, I've never spent a day working in entertainment before this. And now I'm, working with agents and production studios and entertainment attorneys and really learning about it. But that makes it so fun. And I also think that people are it's like refreshing in a conversation when you're like, actually, we're thinking about doing it this way because they've heard the same thing over and over again. And so part of what I look for when I'm even hiring team members at Meet Cute is I want people that come from different backgrounds that are excited about media and entertainment, because it means that we just have so many new perspectives. It's all beginner's mindset when we come to these problems that face entertainment. So I actually think that, that actually came out quite a bit in the fundraise. People want to compare to things that they know, whether it's other subscription companies, whether it's other production companies, a company like Quibi. And I think that those were some of the most interesting conversations where it's like, I've studied Quibi. I've studied a lot of the media companies out there. And here's why I think what we're building is so unique and different, not just in the way that we're building it, but in the way that we think and talk and act at the company.
Yeah, good. Just maybe touch on anything else that you can share about kind of going from the venture side of the table to the entrepreneur side. Anything you would sort of like coach yourself, the internal coaching you're giving yourself as you're getting out there talking to investors that you picked up, maybe it's not obvious from the venture side.
Yeah, definitely. I think that the hundreds of conversations that I had with founders, even the emails that I exchanged with founders, prepared me for what it's like to go out and pitch. I think some of the lessons that I learned in that process are actually seemingly pretty small, but important. An example is when you're writing cold emails, keep them short and sweet. No one is going to click on links. Everyone just wants things in the body of the email because people are busy. They spend maybe 10 to 30 seconds vetting whether something's worth their time. The subject of the email matters. I think that I feel very grateful and lucky that I have a network of people that I could go to for both introductions and advice. And that was a really nice way to go out and raise our Series A, which just happened last fall. But other lessons are the best conversations the best pitches don't sound like pitches or presentations. They sound like conversations. So I got really good at telling, before I got feedback from an investor or anything like that, whether that meeting was a good one or not, just from how I felt leaving it. If I felt like I taught them something and they taught me something, I was like, that was an amazing pitch. If I felt like I just talked at someone the entire time and like they weren't leaning forward, asking questions, engaging, I was like, they're probably not the right investors for our company, because I, at this stage of the company, will want someone to lean forward and ask me hard questions. And so I think I got really good at gauging that, because that was me a year ago, or now like 18 months ago, in the seat that I was sitting in. And then, I think that there are small things where it's like, admit that you don't know, or that you're wrong sometimes. Like, I think a lot of times, at the earliest stages of a company, you're not necessarily a spreadsheet company yet. Like you don't know what revenue is going to look like 2 years from now. And claiming that you do can be counterproductive, because then it's like, can they not see the risks that they're taking and the imperfections in this model? And I think you kind of have to accept the imperfections in order to build trust with an investor, where it's like, here's what I don't know. Here are the risks that we're going to be taking if you come into this round. Because then they know that you're smart about those things. And I think that sometimes founders, want to come across like these perfect people and like they have everything figured out and that they're going to be profitable in 3 years. Well, investors know that that's not possible because they've invested in tons of companies before that. So kind of being very human and honest, I think, is important, because those are the things that people pick up on in the first 5 minutes of a conversation. And part of that is being humble yet confident. It's like these things that, you would think that it's just like, if the idea is good and the product is good, none of that stuff matters. But it does matter, because so much of the earliest stages of investing are, do I want to sit across from this person for the next 8 to 10 years and be able to give them advice in a way that they're going to listen to it? So I think that those were like some of the softer things that I hadn't really put into words before, but I found ways to incorporate that learning into the fundraise process. And frankly, it's a lot harder when you're doing it all over Zoom, in my opinion.
Let's touch on that a little bit. Kind of share. Well, first of all, I want to hear. So Series A, tell us about that, and then tell us about pitching on Zoom and any lessons or tips from that, please.
Yeah, definitely. So in our first year of MeetQ, we really proved out that we could make stories at scale, and then we needed to raise capital to go prove that there was distribution and business model opportunities. Now that we've shown that we can make these stories. So that was really like the impetus for us to go out and raise a Series A. Just so happened that about a month after we launched publicly in February of 2020, we had a global worldwide pandemic. So that threw a wrench in some plans, where our 5-person team was now in 4 different states. We were doing all of our productions in studio. We now had to pivot and figure out ways to do everything remotely. But one of the hardest experiences, one of the most challenging experiences, was going through that fundraise completely over Zoom. And I'll tell you why. It's because I was so used to being on the side of the table in person, like grabbing coffee with a founder, bringing them into the conference room to pitch to people. And there's so much right now that you can pick up across the room from someone. You can pick up their body language, the way that they make eye contact, the way that they talk. Do you want to go grab a coffee with them? Is that someone that you want to learn from? And over Zoom, I realized that it comes across a little bit more transactional, quite frankly, especially when you don't have an existing relationship with someone. And I think you have to get really creative in ways to make the conversation not feel transactional. I think another part of Zoom, not just with fundraising, but also with selling, that is hard, is there's a lot of room for long maybes. Like, oh, this is interesting. Let me take some time to think about it. Whereas in person, I think you can bring people to a decision or an excitement point a lot faster, because you're like, all right, is it a yes or a no? Like, should we keep going? Should I invest time? So I found myself sometimes not being able to discern whether something was worth investing a ton of time in, or whether it was a dead end early on. And at the beginning of the fundraise, I wished that I could just jump on a plane, go pitch people in person, but we weren't vaccinated at that point, so I couldn't do that. So I think over the couple of months that I was fundraising, I started to pick up on ways to do that, and honestly be really honest and transparent. Like, this is where I am in my process. I need to know where you are, because we're all figuring out how to do this fundraise completely remotely. Here are the things that I need from you in order to know where we stand before our next meeting. And just being really open and honest about that communication, I think went a long way. It definitely didn't occur to me early on in the process, but that's stuff that I learned later that really helped kind of speed things up with certain people. But that was definitely challenging. And there were times where, I was like, maybe we hold on this stuff until we can do this in person. But, frankly, that I'm really glad we didn't, because that wasn't an option for a long time. And we just had no idea what the course of the pandemic looked like. So yeah. I think there are definitely ways to do a remote fundraise, but it's important to just keep all of those nuances in mind as you're pitching.
So let's dig in a little deeper. I like that little phrase, to overcome the long maybes. You're really saying, here's where I'm at. I need to know where you're at, kind of being a little more prodding or something like that. On the, you mentioned Zoom, it's more transactional. How do you sort of overcome that and make it more personal? Is there any tactics or tips or any other phraseology that you sort of find useful on Zoom that maybe you weren't using in the live pitch meetings? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that using time in that meeting to talk about what the office culture is that you want to build, what the team is that you want to build, because people can kind of gauge what you're like in person and then imagine what you're going to do when you're leading people. But I think that is a lot harder over Zoom. So I think actually putting words to some of those kind of soft, what people would call softer things that are not as tangible. It's not revenue, it's not product, but it's what are you going to be like as a leader? Or what is the company, the vision that you want to build? I realized that it was really important to communicate that in words, because that stuff isn't coming across. It's not coming across that you want to do weekly check-ins with each member of your team. It's not coming across that you want to have KPIs that everyone's tracking to quarterly, and each person has goals. So I think it's some of the people and operational part of the company that a lot of people would just assume is happening in the background, that you actually have to communicate around more. And then just even letting them know about your personality, through Zoom, here's what I'm like as a person. Here's what I'm like as a leader. I will caveat by saying a lot of the investors that I was pitching to, I had met before I started fundraising remotely. So at least the people who ended up investing in us, but I did raise from people who I hadn't met before also. So I think that that leads me to another separate point, which is building relationships with investors, not in fundraising mode, is really important, because that's where they're going to get the personality, the in-between points, rather than just the transactional ask. And, I think every company, as they scale, will get more inbound from investors and in times when you're I'm heads down. And I think that there should be times when you just don't take any meetings with people because you are heads down and you're I need to figure out how to launch this product, or I need to figure out this pivot that we're working on. But I will say that those, sidebar conversations that I had when I was on the investment team at USV served me really well when I was going out to fundraise, because people kind of knew who I was, knew my personality, they trusted me. And I think that helped layered on with some of these other things that you can do remotely.
Yeah. I'll let you go in just a minute, one or two more questions. Any tips for that? Tips for building relationships with investors, even when you're not in fundraising mode, kind of that pre-work or nurturing, as I call it sometimes. Yeah. Any tips on that?
Yeah. I don't think it has to be super formal. I think it can be as easy as hey, this is something we're working on right now. I just wanted to share it with you. And maybe it doesn't even get a response, but at least they thought of you. So if there's a cool update or a launch or, some cool press that you got, those are just nice check-in points. And I think that, you don't want to do it too often because then it's annoying, but you want to do it at enough of an interval so that people are oh, they're working on cool things. I should talk to them in the future.
What do you think is a good timeline? I mean, roughly monthly, every other month, every quarter?
I think for people who aren't investors, definitely I just, because of how busy things are, I almost say it's 6 months because they're not actively thinking, I, will send out some sort of update to our investors on a quarterly cadence and, get their feedback on things. But I think that for someone who's kind of tangential, like orbiting the company, it would be like quarterly to 6 months, because frankly, like, I think there's just so much going on in an early stage company that like, you also don't want to always be updating people. Like at some point you're like, all right, I just need to block off time to go build, and then I can do my updates later. But like, I think that like, every half year, either jumping on a Zoom or just sending an email as a nice gesture to just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. And the ideal situation is that you've pitched to them before, maybe they said no or something, but we want to keep tracking you, and they approach you because they're leaning forward. Like I think you want to have investors who are like, that's the idea I want to invest in. And they want to like hear about you. That's like the best setup, because then you feel like, okay, like I can't right now, but I'm going to take time, in this month to touch base with you. And I think it'll be really nice for us to talk through things together. So that's like the ideal situation, is to have someone reaching out and saying, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on at your company? Would love to get an update. And I think those are really nice ways to check in with people.
Very good. All right. Last question. It's a 2-part or maybe 3-part question. How much did you end up raising in the Series A? Who led it, or who was part of the deal? And then any other tips you haven't shared that you'd like to share for founders raising in the space, or maybe tips for pitching USV, or anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah. So we ended up raising a just over $6 million Series A. USV, LocalGlobe, which is a London-based venture firm, and Lerer Hippeau led the round. And then we had a few smaller investors that participated in the round, all in the like audio or media and technology space. They're incredible investors. I would say like there's so many resources online for like tips on pitching and things like that. So I honestly would say like nothing super tactical at this point, just like, your company the best. So like there has to be like that air of confidence when you go into these, because everything there is to know, and you're knowledgeable about it. So just like have confidence in that and have conviction in your ideas. And that's the thing that people should lean forward when they're listening to. So that's like the last thing I'd probably say, is just like conviction in your ideas and in your vision has to come through when you're fundraising.
Very good. All right. Well, I've taken enough of your time. If people want to listen, it's simply meetcute.com, which I think then goes to meetcute.simplecast, something like that. What's the best source for the people to tune in?
Yeah. So easiest way to come find our stories is listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to audio, go listen there. And then follow us on socials. We're like always updating, all of our social media to reflect the stories and seasons that are coming out. So that's definitely a great place to stay up to date with us.
And is it free today, or is there a subscription model, or what do people have to do to listen?
So we have a lot of free content, and we release seasons every month. Every Tuesday and Thursday, there's a new episode coming out. So all of that is content that you can access anytime, anywhere. We do have a subscription offering on Apple Podcasts, and that is our entire library of 300 rom-coms, plus a new short 15-minute rom-com every single week. So that's a subscription offering that we just kicked off last month.
I think you said, when you were doing sort of the MVP, did you actually record some of the first ones, or did you write any of them? Or
I didn't. No. I have recorded pre-rolls and trailers for them before, and that's where I, got a mic and started learning how to do that. But we have much more talented writers and voice actors than me, and I leave the creative to them. They are excellent at their craft.
Good stuff. All right, Naomi, thank you so much. Meetcute.com. Find it on all their various channels. And we'll catch you when you launch your amusement park, and we can talk about the journey between here and there and all that good stuff. So thank you very much. Keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. It was great to chat with you today.
Okay, bye.